Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from Denver, Colorado, we have Robbie Balenger. Robbie is a plant-based ultra-endurance athlete obsessed with finding sustainable motion through space and time. This obsession leads Robbie to seek out mammoth athletic projects that span weeks and months. By exploring recovery techniques and honing diet choices, Robbie is investigating how he can keep going forever. Welcome, Robbie.
Oh, thank you for having me. Excited to chat with you.
Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. Now, can you explain to some of our listeners that might not know what exactly is an ultra-endurance athlete?
For me, it's defined by, I like to take on really massive efforts that most of the time take multiple days. So, we think of there's marathons and then there's ultra marathoners, and that's anything where an effort's over 26.2 miles. Well, I've now stretched that out to my furthest being 3,175 miles, which I did over 75 days as I went from Huntington Beach, essentially just right south of Los Angeles, to Central Park in New York City. So really big efforts where you're, maintaining high mileage day after day.
So you ran all the way across the country, the United States, 3,175 miles. Transcontinental run, and it took you 75 days. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So it averaged out to 43 miles per day.
So you ran 43 miles a day, just kind of running.
Yeah. One foot in front of the other on the, the white line on the shoulder of the road, and dodging cars and running from dogs and all that fun stuff that you encounter as you make your way across.
When you're running these long distances, does it become a spiritual journey, sort of a form of meditation?
Absolutely. That's a huge part of it for me. I found running about 8 years ago. My girlfriend at the time, she was a runner, and she invited me out on a run. I made it 2.5 miles, and that was as far as I could go. But what happened in that run was I felt very at peace and whole in a way that I had never felt before. And so since then, that has kind of always been the cornerstone of this practice for me. Is it's somewhere where I go to that I get to feel as pure and honest as I ever do. So it's a very spiritual experience for me, for sure.
Now, how much of it is mental versus physical? I mean, you're out there, you're running. I mean, your body has to be like screaming to quit, or at least your brain, your mind has to be thinking about, you got to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you progress through the sport, it becomes more and more mental and less physical. As you start, you have ligaments and cartilage and things that need to develop in a way that they can take on the beating that you're putting on them from the constant, your feet hitting the ground. But then over time, all of that adapts and becomes just what you do, and then it really is a mental game of, can you push yourself to your threshold, and then how long can you maintain it? So I'd say at this point in my career, it's definitely more mental than physical.
Take us back to the beginning when you started running. What was it about running that just kind of clicked with you? I mean, you said that you really liked it, but what was it specifically that made you keep continuing to do it?
Well, a little backstory. So at that point in my life, as I was finding running, I had, for pretty much my whole adult life, been in the restaurant and bar scene. I was running restaurants. I'd ran bars in the past. And with this comes a lifestyle often that is work hard and party just a little bit harder. And that was definitely my MO at that time. But I knew it was something that I was getting tired of. It just wasn't really fulfilling me in a way maybe it did in my early 20s. And when I found running, it had this grittiness to it. It was kind of a way to express this like more grit-driven, harder version of a man, which I had kind of been exploring through this party lifestyle. So that was really resonated with me quite a bit. And it also helped me to become more accountable to myself. If you want to get up early and go for a run, then you're probably not going to close the bar down the night before. So that was really something that resonated with me at that time in my life and was the reason I started really pushing. And also, as we spoke of earlier, just I felt this internal calling to it. It felt very natural. It felt very innate to me. It felt like something that I was missing, had been missing for so long, though was so important and fulfilling for me.
What is it about a plant-based diet that makes it ideal for ultra endurance?
The first thing that comes to mind when I think of that is the lower inflammation, right? So meat causes inflammation, inflammation causes soreness. Well, if you're sore, then that's going to slow down your ability to train hard. And when I adopted a plant-based diet, all of a sudden I realized I didn't have to be sore in the morning. I could go out, I could do a 20-mile run. I'd wake up in the next morning and I'd feel fine. And that meant I could do it again. So that's definitely the first part. Also, it's less laborious on your system. So when I am in these really large efforts, I need all the energy I can to go towards my legs, to putting one foot in front of the other. And if I'm staying away from meat and dairy products, then my digestive system isn't having to work as hard. Therefore, there is more energy for my legs. And then also in these multi-day efforts and in life in general, I want to put foods in my body that build it up instead of break it down. And that's what we find with fresh produce and legumes and things of that. Whereas meat is just every time you eat it, it breaks your body down a little bit. So those things combined really help to create what I would call, lack of a better term, like my superpower, this ability to push day in, day out.
Sounds like you really like pushing yourself.
I do. Yeah. I really like finding that edge, that threshold to where it almost feels like too much and maintaining that and staying in that spot.
How does that feel?
I think on its surface, one would describe it as pain. There's definitely a lull, dull pain that comes with that. It's not acute. It's not like one would feel when you cut yourself or something like that. But in that lull, dull pain, there's a lot of growth that comes from it, whether it be learning to push through adversity, but also you feel very alive. If my legs are sore or not, I mean, again, I don't get as sore, but are just really tired and there's aches and pains. Well, I feel very alive in that. I know I'm here. I know I'm present on this earth and I'm doing something big. And that really resonates with me as just, it keeps me in the moment. It makes me live very intentionally. And while I'm doing these efforts, days feel so much longer, so much fuller of life than they do in my mundane, everyday life. So those are the things that keep me coming back to it.
What is it about ultra endurance events that makes you so passionate?
For myself interpersonally, I know that every time I do one, I connect with myself on a deeper level than I had before. And I think that comes a lot from, we live in a very connected world. And in this connected world where we're always being inundated with the news and text messages, social media, I find for me, I lose myself in that. I get much more concerned with the bigger picture and less about who I am internally. And when I put myself in these situations, all of that whittles away and it comes very much back to who I am. And I get to explore that. And when I come out the other side, I feel a little more grounded and have a little more understanding of who I am. And then also, the bigger the effort, the bigger a thing I take on and accomplish, the more I get to promote the efficacy of this plant-based diet and also other things that I'm now exploring. Like I'm really looking at recovery and tools within recovery that can help me to be the best athlete I can. But that also directly translates into being the best human I can be. And being able to share those stories and those tips with others goes a really long way and is a reason that I come back to it again.
Now let's just run down some of your accomplishments, right? You ran across the U.S., as we spoke of earlier. You did the most loops around New York City Central Park Loop Challenge. Was that 16 loops, about 100 miles in 18 hours? And you just completed the Colorado Crush. Can you explain to us what the Colorado Crush was?
Yeah, absolutely. So Colorado Crush, kind of the way it came about is I was wanting to take on a big effort here in the state I live in, Colorado. So I started looking at what are these bucket list items, these things that endurance athletes will try to do in, say, a summer. And to me, there were really three major iconic ones. There's the Leadville Trail Series. So up in Leadville, Colorado, there's a very famous ultra race called the Leadville 100. That's in August. Well, in the months before that, there's a marathon in June and then a 50 miler in July. So marathon, 50, 100 spread over 2 months. I want to take that on. And then between the marathon and the 50 miler, I ran the Colorado Trail. So that's a trail that goes from here in Denver in a southwestern direction to Durango, Colorado. It's 485 miles. I ran that in 11 days. And then I did the 50 miler. And then between the 50 and the 100, I summited all of the peaks in Colorado over 14,000 feet. There's 58 of them. We call them 14ers. And then finished the summer again with the 100 miler. So multi-month, 63-day effort. In that time, I traversed about 1,200 miles. And the elevation gain to me is really the impressive part. I climbed an elevation of 308,000 feet. So to put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of summiting Mount Everest sea to summit 10 and a half times in 2 months.
Wow.
So that was the effort. It was something that brought me home here to Colorado, allowed me to be on the trails, be amongst nature, and take on this massive feat.
So in 63 days, basically 2 months, you did all of this.
Yeah, correct.
That is absolutely amazing. I mean, I'm just sitting here looking at this list, and it's the Leadville Marathon. It's the 480 miles of Colorado Trail, the Leadville 50, the scaling of all 58 Colorado 14ers, and then finish it off. Why not with the Leadville 100?
Yeah, it was a very big summer. One that I just pinched myself often, that I was so lucky to get to spend so much time amongst the beauty that we have here in the Colorado Rockies.
Yeah, it really is beautiful there. I would like to shift gears right now to your plant-based journey. How and when did you transition to a plant-based diet?
Yeah, so for me, the transition started probably about 3.5 years ago. And then around 3 years ago is when I went 110% plant-based. And for me, that process came through, as I spoke of earlier, I was running some restaurants in Austin, Texas, and decided it was time to kind of let that chapter of my life go. I sold my shares in the company. I pulled myself out of operations, and my fiance and I moved from Austin, Texas, up to Denver, Colorado for her to go to nursing school. And as we were making this transition, Hurricanes Irma and Maria hit down in the Caribbean. And I had lived down there in my early 20s and still had many friends and loved ones down there. And they lost everything in those hurricanes. And in that time, I decided to go travel down there and try to help in the relief effort. Upon getting there, I found that these storms were just huge. And a lot of that I really equated to climate change. And when I came back, I knew whatever I did next, I wanted it to have some meaning within the environmental world. And about this time, I was also running a lot more. I had read Scott Jurick's book, Eat and Run. And I was like, okay, well, let me try this plant-based thing. And it really was for performance. But as soon as I adopted it and realized how much it worked for me as a runner, I also realized that it was one of the biggest things that we as individuals can do to help curb climate change. So I was like, okay, like this is just so big for me on so many levels. And as soon as those two things connected, I knew it was something that would be with me for the rest of my life and I would never look back. And not only did I do that, that was about the time I decided, okay, well, I'm going to run across the United States and I'm going to do it to create conversations about better food choices with communities that I encounter and also show the efficacy of this diet of being plant-based and how as an athlete I can still perform at a high level. And then what I found out as I ran across the United States was not only was it that I could perform, it was the reason I was able to perform. Like that really solidified for me while I was out there.
What positive changes did you see after you changed to a plant-based diet, both physically and mentally?
Physically, I just felt lighter. As mentioned earlier, I was able to bounce back from runs. There wasn't the soreness, no phlegm. I just felt more vitality in general. Also with it came a high dose of compassion that I didn't have before. And I think that comes through letting go of that cognitive dissonance that we all carry, knowing probably that these food choices are affecting other beings so negatively, but we can't see it. And then the moment that you fully embrace a plant-based diet, you're able to then see that. And with that, I feel like all around, whether it be to animals or to other humans, I just became a good bit more compassionate.
You said that you transitioned over 3.5 years ago, but about half a year it took you to transition. Is that correct?
Yeah, it wasn't an overnight thing.
What were some of the things that you struggled with when you first decided to change to a plant-based diet?
I think kind of big picture, it's just like dismantling, 30 at that time, 33 years of habits. And as far as what food items were hard for me, it was definitely, as I think a lot of people transition, it's like vegetarian and then into being plant-based. And for me, it was letting go of cheese. That was really hard. I'd ran some really nice pizzerias in Austin, Texas, and mozzarella was a very big part of my life. So letting that go was really hard. I managed to do it over a bottle of wine and a half a wheel of brie cheese with my fiance, and just too much cheese. And after that, I just never had to go back. I was like, I overdid that last night, and I am good. But that was the final thing that hung on for me was really nice cheese.
So you did it for environmental reasons. Now that you've done it for environmental reasons, has it started to affect all the other factors? I mean, like animals, obviously your health and the environment are the three pillars of a plant-based diet. Has it started to be one of those things that you notice more of now?
Oh, absolutely. I think, as I initially took it on, like the ethical side, the animal side just really wasn't there for me. I just wasn't really acknowledging it. And then quickly that became, a cornerstone of it for me, and something that will, no matter if I got into some spot in life where I wanted to be very self-loathing and didn't care about my own health anymore and gave up on the environment, well, that animal component will always be there. And, I think there's a lot to be said about, mass-produced products, especially within animal, with animal, with items that are made from animals, is just that's where the immense suffering is happening. It's not like cows are just happily grazing in fields and that's what we're consuming. Right. These things, they're being tortured, and there's a big difference to me between death and torture. If animals were completely raised sustainably, or people are just imbibing in those, like I think I'd have less of an issue. But that's just not the case. 95% of all animal products come from really horrible sources right now. And that to me is just something that is not acceptable.
Where did you get the courage to start this project, the Ultra Endurance Athlete?
I think I just kind of always grown up as one. I grew up as one, and as an adult, someone that always pushes things to the extreme and always wants to fully invest myself in whatever I'm doing, whether that was, as I mentioned earlier, partying or my career. And the same stood for this. It was like once it started, it was just like, well, how far can I take it? And then also growing up, my mother instilled in me this saying from a very young age that was, you can do anything you set your mind to. And these big, massive efforts are a true test of that. And that's what keeps me, one of the things that keeps me coming back to it is just like pushing the envelope to prove to myself that I can.
Now, when you're out there and you're on one of these ultra endurance events, do you ever think of failure, or do you ever consider failure, or does that not even enter your mind?
I don't give it oxygen. No, it's not something I really spend a lot of time with, thinking on or contemplating, because it's just not an option. There's always a way that you can problem solve. There's a way you can mitigate whatever's going on. And if you don't allow it, the oxygen to start, becoming more, then it's not part of the equation.
Now, what is one of the things that's exciting you right now?
As far as like efforts, I like taking on big efforts. I also like supporting friends that are doing them as well. I'm going to be heading to England here in a couple of days to help support a friend who's doing a thing called 48 and 30. He's running a marathon in all the 48 counties of England in 30 days. That excites me a lot. Doing some bigger collaborative efforts with some other ultra endurance athletes probably next year. really exciting to me. I'm spending a lot of time on the bike right now, which I've found is kind of part of my transition after these big events. It kind of lowers the impact, but allows me to continue moving my body. So maybe exploring that more. But just to continue to push the envelope physically, I feel really blessed to be in a situation where I'm fully sponsored, so I get to fully invest my time in this. As much as the plant-based thing is it is the cornerstone of my athletics and my advocacy. I'm really interested in recovery right now. My sponsor is a company called Newcom, and it's a neuroscience technology that, through a 3-part system, allows you to go into a really deep, restful state where your brain it goes into alpha and theta waves. Mm-hmm. And this is where our parasympathetic nervous system takes over. This is where cellular recovery can happen. And utilizing that, spreading the message about that is really important to me. I feel as though much of the sickness and disease in the world that we see right now comes from 2 things: inflammation and stress. And through a plant-based diet, I can lower my inflammation. Through applying this Newcom technology, I can lower stress. That's going to increase my lifespan, my vitality, and being able to start making other people understand that and getting them interested in this is something that's really important and excites me a lot right now.
Do you meditate?
Life is busy, and I've at times tried to get into it and found that, it's a practice. It's something that takes a lot.
Yeah.
And that practice, that time usually goes to my running. But I'll be completely honest with you, like Newcom does that for me. Newcom allows you to click into deep meditative state without having to have the practice. So like before we did this podcast, we started at 6:00 my time. At 4:50, I laid down for 50 minutes of Newcom, and that really helps to center me. It makes me feel just really grounded and centered, and allows me to kind of articulate my message as clearly as possible. So it's a really cool tool, and it's so highly of a suspect thing. You tell people about it, and they're like, "What?" And like, I was that way until I tried it and was like, "Holy hell! Like this is profound." And I think it can really fundamentally help people, a lot of people.
How does it work?
So it's a 3-part system. And essentially it's the main part is an app that has tracks on it. They're binaural beats. It sounds this really melodic, beautiful music. So you put those on, you put a small patch on your wrist, and that patch has been charged with a small electrical current. And when you place it on your wrist, it sends a message to your brain to start releasing GABA. GABA is what our body releases as we fall asleep. Mm-hmm. And then you put on an eye mask. That's the 3rd part. You lie down with it, and the tracks range from 20 minutes, which is like this short power nap, up to 120 minutes. And in there's a patented technology that, so you could go on YouTube and you could look up binaural beats. Well, the problem with those is your brain won't stay in it. It'll work for a minute, and then your brain will get used to it. Next time you try to use it, it won't be as potent. With this, the architecture of the sound, they don't do a complete loop. There's a spike in there. And in that spike, it kind of like re-scrambles your brain a little bit. So every time it loops, your brain gets a little caught off guard, and therefore it stays in it. That combined with the GABA that your brain's releasing due to the patch, you can literally stay in this state for, depending on how depleted you are, it can go a long time. So it's been used for the past 10 years by special forces. So Navy SEALs, Army Rangers use it, and also a bunch of pro football and hockey teams. You can loop the tracks, and what'll happen is your brain will stay in it until it knows it's kind of gotten all of that rest and recovery it needs. I've got the record right now as I've stayed in it for 6.5 hours.
Really?
And that was during this Colorado crush. I was just completely depleted. I had been going for like 19.5 hours, had only gotten 4 hours of sleep the night before, laid down, put on Newcom, looped the track so it would continually go until I kind of woke up. And it was 6.5 hours, and I pulled out the headphones and went about the rest of my night's sleep.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's really cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting technology, and obviously it's been around for 10 years, so it's not something new and fangled.
No, it is. Initially, it was a medical device company, and they used it mainly. Dentists were using it for patients that had high anxiety going into dental procedures, and they could put them in it and it would keep them calm throughout the procedure. And then it's just over the years, kind of, they've continued to refine it. And where it's at now and why they brought me on is they've now figured out a way. It used to be a $10,000 system, then it was down to $5,000, and now you can get it for $49 a month.
Wow.
And it's just that they've refined the technology. The part that they refined is this patch. It's very interesting. It used to be that there was this like box, and you had to put these electrodes behind your ears, and that was what was able to stimulate your brain to release the GABA. And now they figured out how to do it through this patch. And that was really the key to this next generation of Newcom. And right now, like if you were to go to the website, they're redoing it. They're redoing the packaging, the branding to be more sell to the masses instead of individually selling it to, again, like special forces or like the FBI's, their hostage units have it because they end up in high stress situations so often and they need to kind of come down from it. So yeah, it's super, super cool. They're really supportive of me, and I just wholeheartedly believe in what they do. Again, like I feel like there's this like fountain of youth that can come out of this with also being plant-based. Like you're lowering inflammation and lowering stress levels, and that's where so much of our sickness and problems come from.
You said that you were in it for 6 hours. What did you mean by that? Do you just stay in it until you're done, or is it something that you just turn on?
You can do a prescribed length, right? Like today I knew I had 50 minutes. That was my budgeted time before I needed to get ready to get on the call with you. So I put on a 50-minute track, and I stayed in it the whole time. And then what happens, it kind of works, again, talking about arcs, it works in an arc. It builds you up into it, and you go to the depth of it. Like if it's a 50-minute track at like 25, 28 minutes, you're at kind of the deepest spot of it. And then it'll start to roll you out of it. And they can change that frequency of the binaural beat so that it brings you out of that alpha theta, getting back up into whatever the next one up is. There's 6 of them. I kind of forget what's outside of those. So it kind of controls that. But if you loop them, you never come so far out of it that it'll pull you out if you're really tired. So you can kind of stay in it. And then there is a point, like if I did an hour and 20 minute or 120 minute track right now, I'm already pretty rested from already doing it. It would probably pull me in it, but somewhere in there, I would just kind of wake up and be like, I'm done. I don't really need to do it anymore. It's super interesting and like kind of subjective to the person and kind of where you're at in your fatigue for the day or how high your stress levels are.
That's really amazing technology.
It's cool. It really is. And I really feel like it can really help a lot of people. We just got to get the word out about it and get more people signed up.
I find this very interesting, this Newcom. You sold me on it. I'm going to sign up.
Well, and also, you know, if you can put this in the show notes, or I can say it, you can add it in there. But the new website is going live this week, and there will be a promo code spot. And if you put in Robbie 50, you can get 50% off your first month. So you can try it out for $25.
That's great. So Robbie 50 is the promo code.
Correct.
And that's half off for your first month.
If you have any issue there, you can also go to my Instagram account, and there's a link to a landing page that describes Newcom from my perspective, and it will also allow you to access that discount.
Can you just describe for us your normal day?
Yeah. So I get up. Right now, I'm getting up usually around 5:30. I take care of our animals. I have a dog and 2 cats. We get them fed. Start the morning with a big smoothie. I kind of do a little bit of computer work, and then I try to get active. Whether right now, again, it's mainly riding my bike. Usually it's probably running. And my efforts will go anywhere between an hour and a half and 4 hours. Then I come home. I fix a light meal, usually a salad with a lot of beans and rice in there, like a hearty salad. And then I Newcom for anywhere between 30 minutes and 70 minutes, kind of utilizing a biphasic sleep cycle and really honing it in through Newcom. And then afternoon doing house chores, getting everything ready for my fiance to come home from her job. She's a nurse. Mm-hmm. And preparing dinner. And then at dinner, we have a really hearty dinner. I like to really, get a lot of my calories in the evening. It's just kind of what works for me. And then wake up and do it again the next day. And also in there planning out whatever the next crazy thing that comes to mind that I want to execute.
So you don't have anything on the list right now. You're open.
I'm open. I do have things floating around in my head. I would say the more I get into this, the more my efforts become unique and somewhat intellectual property up until I get closer to them, because you don't want anyone else to kind of jump on the bandwagon or get to it before you. So I kind of keep them tight right now. I'm really good about when I do get closer to things, starting to, tell others about it, usually through social media and my website.
Do you have people that help you during these times?
Absolutely. I have a very strong support crew around me. And it's something that I just find so valuable. And I have so much gratitude for those that help me. So, my fiance being number one, she's a really strong athlete herself. She's a really good runner, and she supports me, and she knows how to support me. Whether it be that she gets to be out there with me every day, or from home, she takes care of a lot of the logistics while I'm doing these things. And then actually, it's kind of a family affair. Her family is a lot of my support system in these. Her sister, who is a plant-based nutritionist, she was my crew chief as I ran across the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was also my lead crew when I did the Colorado Trail. She was there with me the whole time. She actually hiked the Colorado Trail in 2019. So she's a vital, vital part of it for me as well. And also Shelly's parents, they're there. My mom always is around to help. And actually my soon-to-be brother-in-law, he was my companion throughout the Colorado 14ers. He actually ended up doing 35 of them with me.
Wow.
And so there's a big group of people around me, between them and then my sponsors, again, being Newcom, and then an apparel brand called 10,000. There's a whole community that helps me to do the things I do.
When you're doing one of these efforts, how do you eat? Do you just stop on the side of the road and chow down a salad?
Yeah, I think, the most interesting was definitely the transcontinental run, because it being a 75-day effort, you really you got to make sure you're staying on your calories, because it's such a long effort. If you don't, you will just literally like wither away to nothing.
Right.
So I was consuming 8,000 calories a day.
Wow.
And I was doing that throughout the course of the day, eating 11 times. So I ran across the United States in 5-mile increments. Every 5 miles, my crew would be there with our van and camper, and they would have something for me to eat, whether that be a smoothie. We had concocted a smoothie that had about 1,000 calories in it. And then if it wasn't that, it was cold pasta, boiled potatoes with salt, fruit with a side of nut butter and chocolate, just all types of things like that. And then at the end of the day, I would round it out with this great like camping meal. It's called Outdoor Herbivore. They focus on vegetarian and vegan camping meals.
Mm-hmm.
And a double portion of that is between 12 and 1,500 calories. And then we would cook it down with coconut milk just to add more calories. And throughout all of that, every day it was right at about 8,000. So lots of eating going on. I would say since then, my body has adapted quite a bit. I require less calories than I used to and could sustain. This summer, it was much less. And being that I was not able to always have crew with me, because you're on these, much more remote trails, I was eating much more as a normal endurance athlete would, and that being gels and bars during the day. Obviously all being like really clean plant-based versions. Mm-hmm. And then going back to that outdoor herbivore in the evening. Another interesting part of my nutrition plan is both on the transcontinental run and this summer's efforts, I drank very little water, just pure water. I would add a hydration mix to it called Scratch. And that really, it has calories in it and also a lot of the salts you need for your body to maintain. So not a lot of water, always adding something to it just to get more calories and making sure I'm getting the highest performance out of everything I ingest.
What is it about water that doesn't really rehydrate you?
It definitely, it handles the hydration part. But when you're burning so much energy every day, you got to get calories everywhere you can. And so this hydration mix, it's called Scratch, has calories. I might as well have it. It's going to hydrate me as water does, but it's also going to, again, calories and replenish the salts. So you just got to get the most bang for your buck at any time possible. Like that doesn't stand true for everyday life. Like I'm sitting here right now and I have a massive thing of water beside me, but in these
Right.
efforts, it's just like get it all while you can.
So how do you figure out 8,000 calories? What goes into that?
You lean really heavily on those that know more than you. And for me, that was Jackie, my crew chief for the Transcontinental Run. Again, she has plant-based nutrition certificates. And then also she, the year before, had hiked the Appalachian Trail on a vegan diet. And with her knowledge and knowing what it took for her to sustain, we just recalibrated that, knowing how much more I was going to be putting in. It definitely isn't an exact science, but through research we had done of other people doing big efforts, we kind of just honed in that was a good target. I started off a little bit less than that initially. It was more like 6,000 calories. And all of a sudden I would just feel very famished throughout the day. And that was when we'd say, okay, well, let's just up it. Let's up it. And then we just got to a place where it was like, okay, I'm not feeling hungry at any point. Every time I eat, I'm willing to eat, but I'm not feeling like I'm overdoing it, and I'm not losing a ton of weight. So we just kind of, that was a moving target, and where we settled after the first couple of weeks was 8,000, and it's what sustained me throughout.
Now, getting back to the Colorado Crush, what was the hardest part of that?
The hardest part definitely was the elements. Unlike the Transcontinental Run, where if a storm came in or the weather got too bad, there would be a car there to pick me up immediately, make sure I was safe, and we could wait out the storm. That didn't really exist in these situations because you're getting yourself in very remote spots just about every day. So overcoming the obstacles that came through being just totally wet, drenched through for days on end, that happened to me during the Colorado Trail. That was a lot to overcome. When your feet get so wet that you actually, the pad of your foot starts separating from your foot. Like that's a really big problem, and something that took a lot of grit to get through, but also a lot of problem solving to assure it didn't get much worse. That was definitely a part.
What did you do? You said your foot was coming apart?
Yeah, so it was actually it was getting to the point where the pad of my foot was separating from my foot. And it was just because it had been waterlogged for so long. And what we finally settled on that helped mitigate the issue was we would just completely coat my feet in the mornings with Vaseline, and then put on a hose liner and then my socks. So that Vaseline was creating a membrane that was keeping the water from getting to my feet. And that allowed me to continue to push on even when I was soaked to the bone.
What are some of the injuries that you've had to deal with? I mean, you just mentioned the pad of your foot coming off. I mean, what are some of the issues that you run into during these efforts?
So I'd say one thing, and the reason I'm able to do these things, is I am blessed with really good biomechanics. My body is set up in a way that it performs well when I'm running. I have my feet. Like my toes hit the ground first, my heels stay off the ground most of the time. This allows my body to absorb a lot of the shock that one would get off of running on the road. But I think the biggest place where I've occurred injuries was on the Transcontinental Run, and I got shin splints. That was one thing. And usually with shin splints, if you were to go to the doctor, they would tell you to just elevate, rest, and that wasn't really an option.
Right.
So I just had to kind of run through them and started to problem solve on what were things that were in my control. And that was things like changing the shoes I was wearing, putting on compression sleeves, things of that nature. And then often what happens is when you have an injury such as that, you can get over it, but what will happen is something else will manifest on the other side of your body because you've been compensating. And that's what happened. I then, on the opposite leg, got tendonitis really bad in my ankle and in my foot. And so it was back to problem solving. And whereas before it had been about changing shoes and finding a way to give my feet and legs more mobility, this one I needed to lower mobility. So it required wrapping it really tight with an ace bandage, more compression. And those were the two big injuries. They both happened in the first month. And by the time I made it to day 32, I was in pretty good shape. And from then on out, my body had adapted and I was able to continue without any major injuries. And since then, I don't really deal with a lot of injury. I'll be honest with you. I've gotten to a place to where I think my body just understands this is what we do, and knock on wood, I will continue to kind of operate like that.
I'm really curious about this mental aspect of what you do. What is it about you that creates this toughness, this mental toughness that just pushes through everything?
I think I've just gotten to a place to where that's what I'm seeking out, is getting to that place to where, yeah, where again, you feel very alive in this, in the, I don't know, it sounds kind of dramatic, but in the suffering. And once you get to where that is a place you like to explore, you get to celebrate getting there. And then once you're there, it's where I feel the most alive again, the most authentic. And I think a lot of what I'm always looking for is seeking authenticity. And I just feel so pure and so alive. And I know that through it, I'm learning and I'm breaking down all these barriers internally that keep me from exploring those depths of myself. And I find those in these efforts. So it's like a mode for like interpersonal expansion. And I've just learned to love it, and I get there and learn to play in it.
Basically, you get to a point of suffering and then just push through it and stay in it. Is that right?
Yeah, instead of maybe pushing through, you lean into it. I think that's kind of the way I could best explain it, is you get there and you just lean into those feelings. And it also requires some level of like short-term amnesia. You can't remember, you can't think too much about what just happened, and you can't think too far ahead. And so if you can't do those two things, where do you stay? You stay in the present moment. And being in the present moment, I feel like, is the most natural state we can be in. And I live so much of my life when I'm not in these efforts, so worried about the future. Anxiety is something I've battled my whole life. And I think it comes a lot from getting too caught up in the unknown of what's coming. And by doing these things, it stays so much more in the present moment.
Do you feel in a way that it's a way for you to escape the anxiety?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I think for sure. I think I, in a lot of ways, like looked for that so much in my life, was an escapist, and I was kind of running from that. Again, I mentioned earlier, I lived in the Virgin Islands in my early 20s. I also lived up in Alaska. I was a wanderlust young man who was trying to find that wholeness. And then it went into working really hard. And then it was the bars and the drugs and the alcohol. And now this has become like this holistic way that I can seek out these really authentic things that push me away from anxiety. And they also keep me centered afterwards. So yeah, it's become years of trial and error. I think I've found something that really works for me.
So in a way, it's the drug that you're using right now. That drug is pain and suffering?
I would say in a way, but I think often when we think of drugs, it's like you're just numbing it. But for me, it's not really numbing it as much as working through it. Like any time when I did drugs, maybe outside of psychedelics, I didn't come back a better person. I was just numbing it for the moment, and then in the same state, if not worse than I was before when it wore off.
Right.
Whereas with this, it's an exploration, and it's something that I keep positive parts with me after it's over, and I'm cumulatively starting to build those to more and more. And I think that helps me to be a more grounded and wiser person.
One of the things I wonder about pain and suffering is once you get to that point, how do you get past that point?
Something that I've learned along the way, and I learned it on the Transcon, really, maybe in some ultras prior, definitely prior, but it really resonated then, was a lot of it too is like this arc of difficulty, right? Like, I think we often assume that if we start doing something and it's hard, it's going to forever be that hard. Where the reality is there's actually an arc to things, and you hit an apex, you hit that point to where it's as hard as it's going to be, and then it starts to let off a little bit. And it's never going to get completely easy, but you do plateau and go down a little bit in that, like, how hard you're having to push and suffer. And I think that also reigns true for people that are trying to quit something or start something new. We often give up a little too early. because we just assume, oh, this sucks so bad right now, it's always going to suck this bad. And the reality is it's going to get a little bit easier, and then it's just going to become what you do, and then you get to just be that new person. So it's a lot about exploration and kind of ways like that.
What is one habit or hack or tip that helps you stay on track with your plant-based diet?
Keeping it easy, keeping it simple, like at home, keeping, a repertoire of recipes that are not super time consuming, so that I get to fully, appreciate and utilize the rest of my day. That goes a long ways. And also remembering why I do it. Again, the environmental part is a huge component for me. Knowing I'm going to wake up every day and have the strength and resolve to go out and do the things I love. And then also I can wholeheartedly feel as though I'm doing everything I can to assure that there's no needless suffering being placed on any beings on my behalf.
What is one cookbook or book that you've gifted most to someone transitioning to a plant-based diet?
I would say it's definitely changed as of recent. The Plant-Based Athlete, I think, is a really great book that just came out. It was written by Robert Cheek, who's kind of one of the, the old school plant-based athletes, as well as who's the second one? Matt Frazier from No Meat Athlete. That book, I'm featured in it, and I think they've done a great job of breaking down all the questions, aspects of what it takes to be plant-based.
Finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you became vegan, and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
I would say less aware. That's 2 words. And more aware. It's just like that simple to me. It was something that I was kind of fumbling through life and not putting a lot of thought or intent into a lot of my decisions. And now there's a lot more of that, both of those things. Like there's a lot more intent, there's a lot more thought that goes into things that far exceed just my food choices.
It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Can you share with our listeners where people can find you on social media, Instagram, the web?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Instagram at Robbie Balenger. It's my name, Robbie Balenger. And then also, I am really excited. I'll be releasing my new website actually this week, and it's the same as I have my name as the URL, RobbieBalenger.com. Between those two, I will keep everybody abreast of everything I'm up to. And yeah, those are the ones right now.
All right. Thank you so much for being on Plant Your Seed, Robbie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.